Sir Bob Parker, thank you very much.
Good to see you, Jake.
You too. Oompher is all about inspiring people to achieve extraordinary things. So who and what during your life and career has inspired you?
Well, I just think it's been, first of all, my family, my parents. I think that's where we start. We look at those people and they inspired me greatly. My mother convinced me that you could do anything, that you could knock on any door and give something a go. And my dad, just an immensely practical man who believed that he could solve any problem that you gave him. There was a logical way to do everything. So they inspired me, first of all. Then there's the inevitable teacher. And then as you get a little bit older, you start looking at those people in the broader community, either locally or globally, that do extraordinary things. And maybe you say to yourself, I'd like to try that, or I'd like to be like that.
And what about when you were in politics, in broadcasting? Did you have some quite close mentors who helped you along the way?
Well, probably not, to be really honest. I think that I was a great voracious reader, particularly when I was young. So I was very used to going out and finding information out for myself. And today with the web, you can do the same thing. You can dig into other people's lives. But again, there'll always be an individual that you'll associate with a little more strongly. When I was first studying, I wanted to be a zoologist because I'd read about and followed the life of a very famous zoologist that inspired me, and I ended up going to university. In the end, it wasn't the perfect fit for the person that I discovered that I was, but it kind of lifted my sights. And then again, in politics, you would see people and leaders along the way who had the characteristics that you hoped that you would be able to embrace. To be honest, to be straightforward, to communicate well, to be able to produce complex issues into simple arguments that we can all climb on board, and the joy of being engaged in a community. And there, the inspiration would often come from people who were volunteering at a relatively low level in a community, but who would tirelessly commit themselves to things other than their own needs.
Okay, and as you say, when you were a youngster studying zoology and chemistry and then moving into broadcasting, what sparked you to I guess leave that career? And isn't it important for people to have a career that they are passionate about?
Well, I think if you can achieve that, that's great, but it doesn't have to mean that is the most high-flying job in the world. It just means that you should enjoy what you're doing, because you only get one life. It's not a rehearsal, and it takes a while to figure that out, actually, because when you're young, life appears to be endless. There's no end in sight, no real sense that it's a limited amount of time. And it's a mistake not to set your sights where you would like them to be. There's nothing lost by failure and aiming high and then discovering A, it wasn't what you want, or B, it was much harder than you thought. You should encourage those feelings in yourself.
Okay, so just on that point, right at the start of your broadcasting career, before This Is Your Life and all your other shows you're involved in, did you have ambitions to get into politics one day?
No, never actually. I was really more interested, first of all, in science. That was a passion.
Yeah.
And then that gradually got replaced by this idea of getting involved in broadcasting. And if I'm really, really brutally honest, I was probably about sort of 19, 20. I was getting bored with just study. I wanted more excitement, and it seemed to me that television was an exciting place to be, and that's what I was after. I didn't want a job that would be the same each day. I wanted variety and change, and I wanted to challenge myself. And I attempted to get into broadcasting and was rejected, and that really made me feel strongly committed to getting in, and I did all the things I thought I should do to make myself better, and I went and applied again, and I got through the door, and I got a career.
Okay, and you loved it?
Oh, I think it was a great job. When I look back on it after about 2 decades now in local government, I look back on it, and in all honesty, I thought it was such an easy job compared to the world that I found myself moving into, because it was relatively simple, always quite exciting, always very diverse, but I didn't think in the end it was that difficult, which is probably a very unfair thing to say, more a reflection on my ability than people who are looking for jobs in journalism in those areas today.
Yeah, and it was the early 1990s when you filled a position in the Banks Peninsula District Council, later becoming Mayor of Banks Peninsula and then Christchurch. with such an interesting journalism career, which you loved, why the move into politics? What sparked
Well,
you?
it was accidental, and I got involved in a local issue. I loved the community that I lived in, and there were decisions that I felt could have been improved on that were resulting in the loss of some of the heritage fabric of the area. And I voiced a few opinions, and a friend of mine quite fairly challenged me and said, well, it's all very well for you to sound off about these things. How about you try to do something about it? There was a vacancy on the council, one thing led to another, and I ended up being a councillor.
Fantastic. And were you always interested in local government when you got in, or would you ever
No.
consider central government? Or?
Honestly, I wasn't. I mean, I don't know that I really even knew what local government was, really.
Okay.
And so it was really that awakening of the role of local government and the importance in our lives. But I did not see myself as ever becoming involved in politics at the central government level. Still don't. It wasn't politics that turned me on. It was the idea of being able to make some positive changes that I believed in for the communities that I was involved with.
And so, looking back now with all your experiences, what would you say are the key differences between local and central government, and why even now you still prefer and have had a great career in local government as opposed to central government?
Local government's very much about being involved in small issues or issues that can immediately change the environment that you're in. I think at central government you're involved in much higher level structures. You know, it's the highest court in the land. You're shaping the laws of the country. Now they are far-reaching, but it's less common for one person to be able to make a significant change or impact. So I think the attraction of local government is that it's coalface stuff, it's community stuff. You're at home, you're not commuting to Wellington, so you're living in the community all of the time that you're engaged with. And that's incredibly rewarding because although there's tough stuff that goes on in politics, especially in a city, in a metro centre, it can be really tough and really painful. But the pleasure of seeing good things happen and meeting amazing people and having the feeling of being involved in something, you know, trying to make a difference, I think that's pretty seductive once you get through the door.
So that making a difference is really important, and you thrived on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, initially it was probably a selfish difference, like I don't want that building to be taken away, I'd like it to stay there because it enhances, in my view, the space or the area that I'm living in. Later on, of course, the issues become more about other parts of the community and other people's needs, not your own, and you make a shift at some point into that. And I guess that's where some people may leave and some people choose to stay, is that you understand that local government is such a vital part of the democracy, of the democratic process that we love, that we embrace, and that has given us all this extraordinary country and these amazing freedoms that we cherish and that we're able to use to shape our own lives. So local government is a vital part of that mechanism, and it's fantastic to see it in process and in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talking about New Zealand's political system in general, where do you believe some of the real flaws are and things that we could be changing or improving on?
Well, I think local government in the cities is getting separated from the communities. That doesn't mean to say we should restructure it, but I think we need to think about how we refresh people on a more regular basis. You know, there are people who stay in local politics for decades, and I don't think that's a good thing. There needs to be a blend of experience, but you do need change, and I think particularly at the local level that should be encouraged more. Maybe we actually should pay councillors a little less, which might seem a counterintuitive argument in the days when it does take a lot of work and a lot of time, but it would encourage people to move through the system. And I think for central government the problem that they face is that essentially certainly for cabinet and the ministers and maybe another kind of a group of MPs around them, as opposed to being total backbenchers, there's a separation from the community, which must be difficult to manage, you know, to still stay in touch and real and not be seduced by the fact that you live a very privileged life. It's hard, but there are great moments and there are times of access to systems and people and events and other things that can begin to separate people. And I think the other thing that I reckon is really vital is that you need people who have actually been working in the community. It doesn't matter at what level. And there's a danger that we get a political class that start in local government that then slide through to central government, but they've never actually been out there and fought for a job, or been rejected from a job, or made redundant, or started a business. And I think that it's really important to have real life experience, as opposed to being a member of, say, what tends to become a kind of a political elite in some cases.
And that's definitely a common theme from what other people in politics have said, is that life experience is just so important. So where do you see, I guess, some gaps today in the political system in terms of people who have skills and so on? What would your advice be to a group of people who are looking at getting into politics or looking to start studying for the first time? What do you think would be some good areas to study which would help the country and the communities in the future?
I don't think there is a set path, and I think that's part of the problem. If we prescribe a set path, we actually might be robbing the system of a person who accidentally or by design later in their lives get engaged in a political process, because it's all about ideas. And the most powerful thing in the world is an idea, and you're going to have more ideas if you've been exposed to more. So I guess there's a great argument for going on the great OE, if you can do that, for working in a variety of jobs. I look back and say I was fortunate enough to work in factories, on shop floors. I had a variety of jobs in my life while I was trying to find employment. I think also the expectations that I look at, perhaps in my sons and probably their children's generation, because I'm kind of at the grandfather stage now, is that the world is so vastly different that the level of expectation in a material sense that we have today is a lot different to what it was when I was growing up. And I think we've lost something there as well. There's an element in our makeup as a nation, which was we can get out and we can do anything, and we can, it used to be called the number 8 wire mentality. To some degree, the globalization process has kind of removed us from some of that stuff, and I sometimes think we're not as practical people as we once were. And again, that practical approach to life has a lot to recommend it. So it's good if you can do some simple things. And I think there's a lesson in life. There was a guy that I really loved who worked in a council car park, and he'd worked in that car park for decades. When you drove in there, because it was still one of the ones where there was someone who would take a ticket or help you if you needed some help in the car park, you'd be greeted. Didn't matter who you were, you'd be greeted like you were a human being that really mattered. There was always a smile, there was always a cheery word. That person turned what some people would regard as a mundane job into a centre of fun, a centre of the joy of life. Turned an ordinary job into something that really mattered in people's lives, and it was immaterial. So it's all about immaterial what he was doing. It was material what he was thinking. And I think there's a huge lesson in life in the end, and I think you touched on it before, Jake. It's you've got to find something that you enjoy doing, but you have to also be a complete human being. Then it's less important the job, it's more important the people. It's like the earthquakes in Christchurch. We're woken up out of our material slumber and suddenly had to realize that we were dependent on each other, that we needed to work together, that we could help other people, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, and it was immensely freeing. I think that's been a very powerful lesson, and it will take generations for us to forget that in this city, because it affected everybody in pretty much the same way. In the end, it's all about the attitude that you and I and everybody else brings to their job, whatever it is, brings to our relationships, and bring to life, and recognise the great good fortune we have to be in this place of all places in the world.
And I think a huge part of that as well is the leadership, I think, of people in the community, such as yourself when you were mayor. Obviously incredible leadership through a time that was really hard for a lot of people. In the political system, is leadership really important at every stage of it?
Well, I try to analyse what leadership is, because people said to me, well, that was great leadership, and I was given and have been given awards for leadership through that time in particular. And I never thought about I'm a leader. I just thought, well, here's the job that I'm in, and I have to do it well, and people are counting on me. And people, if you do your job well, will often ascribe that quality to you. So I would say that leadership is something that you can be given by other people. You can take it as an individual at any level. I think it's about being creative. I think it's about probably being actually well read, because language is a really important part of leadership. You have to be able to communicate in the role that you're in, whatever that role is, and you have to be able to do it well. So I would say that communication's a huge part of that. And I think compassion.
Yeah.
And I think compassion to me is often the side of leadership that, or supposed leadership, that doesn't get talked about as much. I'm amazed and deeply moved on a regular basis. I mean, still to this day, strangers will come up to me, not just in my city, but around New Zealand and even in other places offshore. And they'll say, thank you so much for what you did at that time. And they attributed to me something which I never really saw in myself, but it was a fantastic feeling, and it still is a fantastic feeling to know that you could make a difference by doing your job well.
Yeah.
And in the end, maybe that's what leadership is.
Yeah. And you did give a lot of people hope. I mean, so what did you learn about yourself in those days more than anything?
Well, I suppose, again, if I look back on it, people say to me, you were just very calm. Well, we were going through, my wife and I, and my family, we were going through all of the things everybody else was going through. But I used to think, well, I've got to get this message out clearly, because people are going to depend on what I'm saying in terms of locating where a water station might be. And then later on, there were the most favourite question that you would get asked by journalists from around the country and overseas was, does the city have a future? Well, in my view, it absolutely had a future, and we'd had an earthquake, but all of the fundamentals of the city and the province really remained, and what we had now was an opportunity, if we could move past the sense of loss, which is very real, and grasp the fact that you have to turn adversity into opportunity. That's one of the fundamental lessons of life. So, look, I did what I thought I should do, and it worked out okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. So just before we head into our quick fire questions, in summary, what does it take to be a mayor?
Well, I think to be a mayor, first of all, you've got to have enough people that actually believe you can do the job. You have to have a lot of patience. I think that's the same with politics all over. I think that patience is an incredibly important thing. You have to have the ability to take a long view. Because sometimes you can get mired in the detail. If you lose sight of what you're really there to do, then that's going to be a bad thing for you, and you won't last particularly long. You've got to have the ability to absorb a huge amount of information. There's an awful lot of reading in any level of politics, whether it's central or local government. There's a massive amount of material, and being on top of that material, and you look at John Key, you see a guy, you can ask him, and any Prime Minister has to have that ability. You have to be able to ask the Prime Minister about anything. And you expect the Prime Minister to have an answer. Well, can you imagine the amount of reading and the ability to understand quickly that guy has to have, or anybody in that position who's going to be successful has to have? So I think you need a good intellect. But I do think also you have to retain a sense of humility, because humility and compassion, they're very closely connected, and I think that in the end is what marks out the people that we look back on in history and say, they were remarkable people. Think of, might be Gandhi, it might be Nelson Mandela. Not quite sure how we put Winston Churchill in there, because he never looked particularly humble, but what he had was a level of understanding of what people were going through, and you felt that he shared that.
So just a few quick fire questions to finish. What would be your top 3 bits of advice for people wanting to kickstart their political career?
Get involved in committees, whatever they are, in your local community. Community boards are great. Local government's a great place to start if you're looking perhaps to hone your political skills. You have to have a good sense of patience, of being prepared to commit a lot of time, because it's not just all standing in front of the cameras and doing ace interviews. It's actually about absorbing a huge amount of information, and it's about a decision making process. And then I think you have to have a clear view of why you would want to do it. Because if you've got into it for the wrong reasons, perhaps it's about being somebody in the community or being influential, but not really understanding what it's about, you're not going to enjoy it. So it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of patience, but there's a huge amount of satisfaction and a lot you can learn, and it's a fascinating place to be, and I've loved being in local government.
Okay, brilliant. And was there a bit of advice that you sort of kept at the forefront of your, I guess, political career and how you went about it near the end that would have been really helpful, having that advice right at the start in your early days?
Yeah, I think it's probably about trying to make as few enemies as you can, which is very difficult in politics. And it's inevitable that that's going to happen. But I think you have to try to stay as broadly engaged as you can, and don't talk yourself into corners. And all the difficult times I had in politics would be when I probably talked myself into a position too early. And it's keeping that open mind. There's a great quote from Mandela. This won't be word perfect, but someone said to him, what made you such a great leader? You always seem to make good decisions. And Nelson Mandela used to say, well, what I would do is I would sit in a meeting and I wouldn't say very much at all. I would just listen to all of the arguments around the table, and then at the end I would sum up. And people would go, Nelson, that's brilliant. You've done it again.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be learned from that little bit of advice and philosophy.
Yeah. And over your whole career, what are you most proud of today?
Oh, probably more personal things than career-based things, to be honest. But in terms of a career-based thing, I'm really proud that when the time came and we were called upon in Christchurch in a really terrible time, that I was surrounded by good people that I had good relationships with, and that I was able to bring the skills that I had learned both in broadcasting and communication and through 2 decades working in local government to bear in a useful way that made a difference in my community. And after a lifetime, what feels like a lifetime in local government, to be able to leave and feel that you were able to make a difference and have that confirmed is an incredibly humbling and very beautiful feeling.
And what would the 16-year-old boy you were think of the man you've become today, Sir Bob?
I don't think I don't think he would have been able to even contemplate the exposure to the people and the places and the things that I've been through. I remember when I was 16 that I just thought the world was an amazing place. And I wasn't clear on where I was going to go. I had no real sharp plans. I had some feelings and ideas. And I think that I would probably look at me and say, well, that's a pretty interesting life you've led, old guy.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool.
Okay.
So to finish off, Sir Bob, can you please look down our camera here and tell us, what are your wise words for the people of New Zealand?
I guess I think what I would like to say is that I feel so lucky that we live in this place. When I look at the turmoil in the world, I think this is a beautiful place, amazing people, and we need to keep our hopes high and our desire to appreciate what we've got here should be refreshed, because if we lose sight of the beauty of our system, our country and our people, then I think we'll have lost sight of the most precious things in the world. I don't think there is a better place, and I just feel so fortunate to be a Kiwi.
Cool. Sir Bob Parker, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Cheers, all the best.
Okay.